So you've clicked on this video because you want to know how to properly expose your video when shooting in SLOG 3 in Sony cameras. And in this video, I'm going to go over the proper way of doing it as recommended directly by Sony. Plus, I'll tell you about how I expose my SLOG 3 footage, particularly when doing run and gun shooting. And this is the lazy, well, not the lazy, but the fast and not so proper way of doing it, but it works for me at least 90% of the time. So stay tuned for that, and I'll talk about that later in the video. So if you're new to shooting video, particularly in flat picture profiles like SLOG 3, the footage that comes out of your camera will look desaturated and just completely flat without any color. So SLOG 3 is designed to record and transmit as much information as the camera or as the sensor in your camera allows it to capture. So it tries to capture as much of that information as possible so that later on in post, you're able to have a wider dynamic range for the image that you're capturing. And this just gives you more flexibility to color correct and color grade your footage in post-production. So I hope that by the end of this video, you'll be more comfortable in knowing how to expose your SLOG 3 footage. So when you're exposing for an image in your camera, what you're essentially doing is just trying to get the right brightness in your image. And this is very important, particularly when exposing for SLOG 3. So there are different tools out there that can assist you and help you nail that exposure. For example, you have video monitors that come with a ton of features. You have false color, you have histograms, as well as zebras or zebras, depending how you pronounce that. How do you call them? Zebras? So my favorite tool for exposing SLOG 3 is to use zebras because they are found more commonly built in already in Sony cameras, mirrorless cameras, unlike waveforms or false color. So zebras are zebra-like patterns that are, hence the name, that are superimposed over the image that you're capturing, and they appear in certain parts of your screen or of your image defined by the brightness level that you have set for those zebras. So what happens is when you're exposing your image, zebras will start to appear generally in areas that are overexposed, but if you set a custom level for those zebras, they'll start to appear once the brightness or certain parts of your image reach that level of brightness. But you'll understand this entire concept by the different methods later on in this video. So if you didn't know, there are a set of brightness levels that you should set all the time if you're using zebras for exposing SLOG 3 footage. You can set these custom levels depending on what you're exposing. Here are the 3 levels that you really need to know about. And this is, I think, one of the most accurate methods of exposing SLOG 3. These are the brightness levels that are determined by Sony, and Sony is the creator of Sony SLOG 3, so we know that that source is pretty reliable. Let's go over the first method. The first method is to use something like this, a gray card. And not just any gray card, but an 18% middle gray. And you can pick one of these on Amazon or any camera store, but I'll leave links in the description below if you want to find out more about these ones. These are pretty cheap. You can pick them up pretty much anywhere. For this, we have to set our zebras first to expose for middle gray. So once you go to your zebras, you can go to custom levels and set it to 41%. And for zebra range, I set that to 2. This means that the range of the zebras will appear only over anything between 39 and 43. So about 2 levels under 41 and 2 levels over 41. So 39 to 43. And you want to do this because this makes the reading of those zebras a little bit more accurate. So once you have this set up, you will use your gray card and put it in the scene that you're filming. And as soon as your zebras appear on the gray card, that means that you are properly exposed for SLOG 3. Using a gray card can also be very useful if you're in an outdoor situation and it's a really bright scene, because the meter in your camera gives you an overall reading of your entire scene. So even if you overexpose by just looking at the meter, you may not be able to get an accurate representation of what you're trying to expose for. So exposing to your gray card will make sure that you nail that exposure, especially in a challenging environment like an outdoor situation. Before we go to the second method, if you are still watching this video, it would be greatly appreciated if you hit the like button and subscribe for future videos from me if you haven't subscribed already. And if you're already subscribed and you came back, thank you again for being here. I greatly appreciate you. So let's go to method number 2. For method number 2, we'll now expose for skin tones using the levels that we talked about earlier. The zebra levels for skin tones are between 48 to 52, 52 being on the higher or on the brighter side. So for brighter skin tones, you'll set that at about 51 or 52. For SLOG 3 is generally a little bit better to be on the brighter side, to overexpose just a little bit. So I normally try to keep my setting at about 50 if I'm exposing for skin tones. But as usual, it's best for you to experiment and try it with different subjects and see what works best for you and the type of things that you shoot, or in this case, the people that you shoot. So I'm here in this interior scene, and as you can see, I have set my zebras to 50. As soon as the zebras appear in my face, or at least in the brighter parts of my face, I know that I'm exposed properly. I could probably even go a step further depending on how many more zebras appear or disappear. But again, that's something that you'll gauge based on your scene. And as soon as you see some zebras in the bright part or the brightest parts of your face, usually that's a good indication that I'm pretty much exposing very well for skin tones. Setting those zebra levels to your skin tones is going to help greatly when exposing for people in challenging outdoor situations again. And method number 3 is to use a white sheet of paper. Well, not exactly, but let me explain. So most people have a white sheet of paper in their homes. The best method would be to use a 90% The best method would be to use a 90% reflectivity white card. This is not exactly it, but it is really close. These white sheets of paper are generally a little bit brighter than the 90% reflectivity white cards, but they can be very useful. So if you don't have a gray card, you have one of these, this can be very useful when you're in a pinch. Let me know in the comments below if you've used these sheets of paper for exposure. So here I am again holding this white sheet of paper, and as soon as the zebras set at 61% start to appear on the white sheet of paper, it means that I am properly exposed for SLOG 3, or at least as close as I can be with this. So the last method I want to share is one that I use 90% of the time, and it works 90% of the time for me. This is when I'm shooting in run and gun scenarios, when I'm not in a controlled scenario, when I'm shooting B-roll at different locations, when I'm traveling and I don't have time to set the proper exposure or bring a gray card with me. This is by no means the proper way of doing it. This is based on experience and of what I've shot and just trial and error, but it works for me. By now, I can pretty much eyeball my scene and gauge and see what sort of exposure I would need for me to get a nice image. So this is just advice, but again, with anything, go ahead, test it yourself and see what works best for you. So the first thing is I always make sure that my exposure meter on my camera, it's always around +1 or +1.7. I never let it go to +2.0. If it's at +2.0 and it starts to blink, I know that I've gone too far. So to be on the safer side, I always just stay between 1 or +1.7. And this is for most situations, but there are some exceptions. If I am in an indoor environment and the scene is a little bit more in the darker side or a little bit moody, I tend to overexpose a tiny bit from the rule that I had earlier. So I try to go between 1 +1.7 to +2.0 without it blinking. So that's usually the range that I try to keep if it's indoors in a darker environment and a little bit more moody. So that just gives me a little bit more of a buffer and helps me to not underexpose my footage too much. If I'm outdoors and I'm just filming a scene with no people, with no subjects, or maybe it's just a crowd of people, I like to keep my exposure meter at about +0.3 to +1.3. So this is just so that I don't completely overexpose my scene, and maybe I want to keep more details in the highlights and all of that, and it's just like a wide shot of an exterior shot. I like to do that for my footage. So another example is when maybe I'm in a backlit environment with a subject and a huge light source behind them. If my subject is who I'm trying to expose for, I have to make a little bit of a compromise. I want to just make sure that my subject is properly exposed so I can compromise letting go a little bit of those highlights. Again, if you're unsure, it's really simple to just check on your zebra levels as well. So just memorize those 3 levels for those 3 different things. If you can't memorize them all, at least memorize the levels for skin tones. And that's going to save you a lot of time, and it's going to save a lot of your footage from just being underexposed or overexposed when shooting in SLOG3. I just wanted to share that with you so that you can go ahead and try that for yourself. Experiment with that in different scenarios and see what works best for you. The best thing is not just to hear it once, but to go and try to use all this information. Go shoot something before a gig, before a project, just shoot anything in different scenarios, in different conditions, and go back to your computer and review that footage so that you know what your footage looks like when you're shooting at specific levels. What are your favorite ways of exposing for SLOG3 footage? I would love to know about that, so let me know in the comments below. So I hope this video was useful for you. I hope you have a blessed day. And here are a couple more videos that you might be interested in watching next, and I'll see you there.